I think it's very important here is that if you're designing a video game, let's say a fighting game, right? So you have 10 characters playable, you should probably have 5 characters, which you start, very important here, you start bottom up, right? But the next 5 characters should be top down. Very important, I think, to work in this way, right? So bottom up is then mechanically, right? So you think about the mechanics create different design, how to get a job in the game industry, rather than how to be a good game designer, right? My forte, right? So I like this question here from Adrian Kant, got it on my basket video, because of course there's been a lot of negativity, right? For me, from people too, with Diablo 4 devs, so right? So let's make a fun video, let's say, what is good with game design? Back in the good old days, right? To me, love video games. How do you become a good game designer? So this video here, I'm gonna start by talking about top to down approach and bottom up approach, and like party composition and like character design. I will do that because I feel it's very, very important when you design any kind of game, like who is the character, right? I always say this thing, I thought in my Diablo video, about level design. When you make a level designer, the most important thing is, for example, Mario. How high can you jump? What can Mario do, All of that is so important before you do the levels, right? Because everything the platform character can do defines how the world can be, right? So this video here, I will explain how I think you should design characters, basically. Especially then, like if you have several playable characters, like a fighting game, a role-playing game, a Baldur skate, Final Fantasy, whatever, right? Party games and so on. And this, of course, is part 1, guys, right? Whereas the video will be like 10 hours long, right? So I start with one part here, top down, up down approach, right? Start with that. Let the video, please subscribe, press the like button, and I think also please digest the video, right? By doing one topic at a time. So let's start talking about it. So let me first explain the concept of game mechanics, game design patterns, and then what that means, right? So a game mechanic can be something like punch, right? Damage or whatever, in the very simplest form, right? A game mechanic is like long range, right? In a very, very specific form. Game design pattern, just like any other pattern, is 2 or more data points that together in a connection creates a pattern, right? So for example, if you have a video game that have permadeath, hardcore mode like Diablo or whatever, right? So you die and you permanently lose your character. That's one game mechanic, right? If you also have the game mechanic that is like Nier Automata Perfect Hard, where you die from any damage, immediately kills you. If you have those 2 mechanics together, right? And then your third mechanic is the game is a smup, like Toho. And that's the actual premise is a smup hell game, right? Kind of like Nier. If you combine those things, right, you obviously get a very hard game. Because the game design pattern, let's call it hard games, right, will tell you that, well, if you have permadeath, it's a smup stage, and you die from everything immediately, yeah, it's probably going to be a hard game, right? So the first important part to understand in all game design is game mechanics and how those combine different feelings, right? Now I have Zangief here because the next concept I want to talk about before we talk about the main video concept is orthogonal character design. So in a very, very simplistic form, how to design 2 characters. Let's say about a fighting game, you can only make 2 characters, right? Then you probably will have a character like Zangief, which is, very big and slow, right? So I call strong, slow. And then you have a character like Kami, which is fast, weak, right? That's basically the concept, right? Because if you only have 2 characters in the whole fighting game, you probably want to have them as unique, from each other, right? We can break it down even more simply. So let's start like this. So orthogonal character design means that you have the orthogonal 90 degrees. It's a math thing, guys. So orthogonal in Swedish means that you have, any kind of shape with a 90-degree turn, right? This is useful for like Pythagoras and so on. But anyway, so if you have a very, very basic video game, an RTS, I suppose, real-time strategy, right? You can only make 2 units. One of them will probably be range, fast, right? The kind of Kami, right? The chun-li, whatever. You have one warrior or barbarian or whatever, right? That's kind of Zangief or, something like that, right? Yeah. So you have one fast character with, range attack, right? Yeah. And one slow but stronger with more health, right? This is the most basic way to design a game, right? And if we're gonna have a third character and we can only live in these 2 axes, right? Like this, I guess, is like range or something and speed or whatever. This is like strength or something, right? If you only have 2 axes, then the third character, we will put it here, right? We will make like all round something, yeah. We will make the third character in between the other two characters or on the extreme on the axis. This is like the most basic thing, right, of any game. And of course, this is so basic, probably bored now. But let's think about it. This is truly the fundamental of game design, right? Because every other game kind of comes from this, right? So think about this thing. You have the Archer Warrior. Then you have a game like Baldur's Gate. Of course, this game, just like D&D in itself, of course, follows that kind of formula, right? Where you have, okay, so you have like one rogue guy, you know, one wizard is range, it's like a fighter lady or something, right? I mean, of course it follows that. Now, these classes here are much more complicated than just having a character that is an archer with no abilities, and a warrior with no abilities, but it's clearly is the same, you know, fundamentals, right? So this really is like how every game more or less is designed, right? And if you don't have like classes or like characters, even in a game, I'm talking about you know, RTS like StarCraft or whatever, right? You might think more about it as in like builds or like formation, right? Okay, if you play with this amount of units, you get the strong, slow thing or whatever. A little bit complicated when you have several playable at the same time, but again, point, it still is the kind of same read, right? Now go back to the very basic graph. So this is the very, very basic, right, of design. Now, of course, like in Baldur games and other RPGs, we might want to add a new dimension, right? So you might do like something on here and put it outside here, and that will be something like a healer, you know? I can spell, I'm an engineer, a healer. Bam, baby, right? But then we do this thing now, as you probably understand, is that not only does this create a very different character, right? It is outside the boundary we had before. This also means you can combine them, so you can have a heal archer, but you can also obviously then, if you draw a new line there, what do we have here? Well, obviously this would be the paladin, right? So we have a healer, there's also a warrior. Bam, there's a paladin, right? See what I mean? But this is kind of how we start, right? First we start with the very, very basic of, okay, I have like a ranged character that is fast, and then I have like a slow character that is, you know, melee, right? Or like I said, we have like a Zangief, we have a Kami or a chun-li, right? And we can work from that, right? Yeah. So of course, in like a fighting game, you don't have a healer, right? But a healer in fighting games, I guess comparably, would be a control character. So you have like Guile or whatever, right? Akuma, old school Akuma or something, or I guess Dalsim in the current game, and JP in yeah. So that would be kind of the contour of them, right? You know. So if Chun-li is archer, if Zangief is warrior, then JP or Dalsim, whatever, right, would be healer, right? Yes, they're not healing, but I mean they're, you know, very, very different. They're projectile based, they're throwing stuff and so on. Yeah, I guess they're more a wizard. But get my point. They're like a new dimension, right? So very, very basic. This is orthogonal design, right? And of course, I bring it up on the whole party design, right? Because this is still very, very core mechanics. If you're talking about very basic stuff, oh, this guy got a lot of health points, right? He's slow. This girl, she's very fast and nimble, you know. This is a very, very basic mechanics. I got a dash, or I can do a double jump, whatever. Very basic mechanics. Or I can heal, you know. Best mechanic, right? But, so that's the best mechanic. An advanced mechanic will be something like, I don't know, Riptide in World of Warcraft. So Riptide is like you heal someone, and then they also gain a heal over time effect, right? This is pretty simple in a sense, because it's a heal and it's not a heal, right? But still, think about that. Do you have healing over time, like typical druid spells? You have typical, you know, heal, flash heal, I heal you immediately. You combine those two, now I have an advanced spell, right? Because I'm combining two different healing concepts for a mixture of that, right? That's a shaman healing in World of Warcraft. That's a much more advanced mechanic, right? Still somewhat simplistic, but clearly more advanced, right? So, but again, my point is that when you're working on the level, right, of bottom up or generally designing, you're obviously starting not with that shaman thing, which is like, oh yeah, combined, you know, you start with the flash heal, I heal you, you know, and then you might say, oh, that's boring though, I want to have something more advanced, right? But you start on that level. And I want this thing to be understood, right? It is very, very basic, because let's now then talk about, you know, bottom up or top down, right? Okay, let's go to the real meat of the video then. Bottom up design versus top down design. I think it's very important here is that if you're designing a video game, let's say a fighting game, right? So you have 10 characters playable, you should probably have 5 characters, which you start, very important here, you start bottom up, right? Then the next 5 characters should be top down. Very important, I think, to work in this way, right? So bottom up is then mechanically right. So you think about the mechanics create different design create different design patterns, right? Different mechanics together, that's one pattern. And what emotion, or rather what kind of gameplay feature, right, does that those mechanics become together? That's bottom up, and then you do top down later. So let's start talking about bottom up then, again, right, more in detail. So think about it a bit gamey, right? So you make a fighting game, and it's like, how do I create, let's say, I want a fast character, I want her to have like dash, maybe something in a fighting game like Street Fighter, maybe something like an avoid projectiles, like some kind of spinning knuckle, something like that. She probably should have some kind of dive or something, right? And again, this could actually not be Kami, right? It could be chun-li, it could be Jamie, it could be any other character that is agile and fast, right? Now then, I add on maybe more thematic to it. Okay, so I want this dive thing to be a dive kick. Okay, that makes sense, it's pretty straightforward. I want this like fireball dodge thing to be the spinning thing. We go around them, okay. Then we can start working in the team, right? But again, the important part here for bottom up, right, is that you start by designing again the mechanics. And this is so important because the way you should think about like games and the combat design, level design, whatever, right, is to start saying, but what is my core mechanics? What are my core characters? And the reason I keep bringing up, Street Fighter or Baldur or whatever, right, is because you have to think about in that party composition that I mentioned earlier with orthogonal design, right? So because you have a part of characters, you want them all to be unique. You don't want, what if you played Baldur's Gate, right? What if you went to Baldur's Gate, and let's say that, everyone was a barbarian, Like you had 6 barbarian companions, that'll be a pretty shitty game, right? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Now, of course, we have seen these games being made for many years now, so it's very much doubtful. Even a bad game designer is not gonna make like an RPG and you have 6 barbarians or 6 wizards, right? Of course you can respect them, but I mean from the default standpoint, that doesn't make any sense, right? But you get why, of course. I mean, it's always very basic, but you get why, because that's not very fun if everyone has the exact same mechanic. Even if you can swap them later, that sounds pretty boring, right? Now, in a fighting game, it's of course even more important, or similar games, a MOBA game or whatever, right? That you can't have like 6, I guess, Zangiefs, I guess, right? Would be a fighting game, yeah. You have, instead of Barbarian, you have 6 Zangiefs. That would be really boring. That being said, of course, I'm not saying that you have 6 Zangiefs. I'm more saying that you would have, Zangief, then you would have Abigail, then you would have Hugo, you would have basically other big, muscular, slow guys, right? So in, for example then, SF6, you have Zangief and you have Marissa. They're basically, both big and slow, right? Because Honda, there is sort of, you got big, slow guys, right? And you have to think about in a budget sample. You can only make a video game with, let's say, 10 characters. Obviously, you're not going to have all the big muscular guys at the same time in the first release. It would be a really boring game. Right? So that'd be terrible. It sounds very obvious, but actually I've seen so many games fail on this thing, and I have to start here, right, in the very basic, right? But there's a reason, in a way, right, you have to think about bottom-up approach. Because you have to kind of define and say, okay, I'm making 5 characters. One should be that, strong, slow character, right? One should be that, like, agile, nimble character, like Kami, chun-li, whatever, but, Juri. But it could be someone else, right? It could be any other character that's, like, a fast, right? Okay, I need a character that's, like, control, a lot of projectiles. Okay, like Dalsim, okay? Then you're gonna work your way up there, right? But that's really how you should map your design first. You should map it, right? What do I want, right? From a mechanics standpoint. I don't care about the characters, and then I fill in. This is the proper, and I fill in, right? First I say I want a wizard, I want a rogue, I want a barbarian. This is the basic of the game, right? And then I actually would have designed the characters around them, the lore, the personality, the backstory. That's bottom up, right? Bottom is I start with the mechanics and I say I need to have a barbarian, I need to have a wizard, and then I am saying who is the wizard, right? Oh, he needs to be this like guy, Who is the barbarian? Oh, she's this crazy warrior lady, she's fun, That's actually later, right? I'm starting with the mechanics because I need to define a good set of, game mechanics and game designs, right? The design patterns, so that makes sense, right? So I get a good game. So I don't end up with, again, then like 6 Zangiefs or whatever, right? Which some games very much do. That being said, I think the very common issue that many games do it's necessarily you have 6 like Zangiefs, that's very uncommon, or 6 healers. It's much more that you have 6 kind of DPS, right? Yeah. If anything, exactly, most games end up with having like 6 rogues. Isn't that usually how it is? Yeah, you kind of end up with like, oh yeah, that's very, very common, right? And I think a massive issue there is because they haven't really thought about that, right? So you have like DPS that are way too similar, they're not unique. Basically, they're not orthogonally different, right? They have too similar. If you go back to that old, so imagine that the archer, right, is the rogue or whatever, something like that, right? So you make the first character an archer, and if you don't care about orthogonal designers, you don't care about making the next character unique as much as they can from the first character, right? You might design a character and put them somewhere here, right? So they're very, very similar to archers. It's like a row, I guess. So they're very, very similar, right? They're not the same. I'm not the same. I'm saying they're similar. And now you're making the monk. This might be the monk then here, So now we have 3. I mean, they're not the same, but they're similar. You'll be point this will not be a good video game if the classes are like this. Yeah, where you're like, okay, archer, rogue, monk, and then maybe a warrior. I mean, that won't be very fun if you only can make like 4 classes, right? That would be very fun right now. It's much better, of course, to work like, okay, the archer is the first character, and then the warrior, and so on. So you should start with this, right? So that is the bottom up, right? You start with the mechanics, and then you work your way around it, right? As I keep saying, I always design games like this, where I first start with purely the game mechanics, right? How is the game fun? How are the characters different? And like I said, it could be a party, right? It's very obvious in a party. But also, again, for fighting games or whatever, it's multiplayer, you have to have different, gameplays, right? So it's like, okay, one is fast, so on. Start with that, right? And again, I don't care who the actual character is, I only care about, again, the gameplay. You're the game designer. You care about the goddamn game. You don't care about the storyline. You care about the lore. I only care about the gameplay. Now then, after I've done as I mentioned, then I put on the layer, right, of who is the character, right? So for me, it's also very important. Aside of when I design a character, it should be a red line through it. It's not a video, but it's basically if I make a warrior character, a big, brutish, muscular lady, right, an oppai wife with big abs, right? Now I have to give her a backstory. Why does she train? Why is she a muscular beefcake, But that comes later, right, Then I will write that later to fit into her mechanics, right? But anyway, that is bottom up. Now, top down then. How does that work, and how is that important to make a full game, right? So top down, guys, is when you still have the character, right? You have whatever you have, but you have a character, you have the faction or whatever, and you're working your way down. So for example, Doflamingo Don Quixote, by far, I was of course arguing for by far again, best bad guy in One Piece by far. So if I'm making a video game and I already have Doflamingo Don Quixote as like he has to be in the game, right? This is kind of how you work in the license games. I worked in a couple of different license games in my life. No One Piece game ever, but anyway. And then of course it becomes very top down, right? Because if you're making a One Piece game, it's like, well, I already have the characters. It's Luffy, it's Crocodile, it's Zoro, it's Nami, and it's Doflamingo. So that is more like, okay, I have to use, how can I, obviously now it's like, how do I make game mechanics that is fitting into Doflamingo, right? So it's like, he can send strings, so he has to have some kind of like string, like get over here mechanic is one thing. He needs to be able to like control all the characters, right? Which is puppetry. Okay, some kind of mind control mechanic, some kind of, he has to have some kind of debuff, maybe they can lose control, He needs to be able to like clone himself, I guess, you know what I mean? So then you're working top down, right? Because you already have the whole character, you have his backstory, everything set in stone, and you can't rewrite that, right? You have to just work and put the mechanics into the game world that fits him, right? The same thing goes with Crocodile. He got the sand fruit, so he needs to have some kind of drying power. He can turn into sand, so you can't hit him. He can like not teleport, but he can like sand, move, turn into sand clouds to kind of fly or whatever, right? He needs to be able to float or whatever, and so on. You know what I mean? So that you come up with the mechanics, right, that fits the character. Okay, that's top down in a license game, but very, very common though. For example, I worked on some Turtles games, right? So then you already have that, well, the weapons they have, right? Michelangelo has the nunchucks, right? Wrath has the saw, you know what I mean? So you can't really like go out of that box, Like Donatello has longer range because he has the bow staff, you know what I mean? So you can have that, like Michelangelo can do longer combos, the nunchucks are faster, you know. So you have an idea how to make them different, right? You have the 4 turtles, how to make them different, but you obviously have to stay in a very like framed environment, right? That's top down, right? Again, licensed games. However, how does it work when you're making I would say a better game, but more freedom, right? You're making your own fighting game, your own role-play game, your own boss gets forward there, right? How does it work then? Well, the thing is that I think it's very important, really important. This is something people miss, I think. Really important to use top-down, even if you have the freedom to do anything you want, right? And honestly, this is a problem I've seen a lot of times in my life, where people like what I said earlier, right? Bottom up, right? So the bottom up, you know, the design, and then, let's say, again, 10 heroes. So now we're at hero 7 or whatever, right? 7, 8 or whatever. And they're still doing bottom up, right? So they're just taking mechanics, they're making that, and, you know, they just do whatever they want, right? The problem with that, of course, is that if you don't care about the lore and story and so on at this point, it's not gonna make any sense, right? Eventually, you have to make the heroes, in this case, heroes, champions, heroes, playable characters. You have to make them fit into the mold, right? You know, and what fit in means is of course very different, right? So, but in Street Fighter, fighting game example here again, Guilty Gear or whatever fighting games, fitting into the mold doesn't mean that this character is like the other characters. If anything, it means different, right? Like if fitting in is like he's from another country with very different. Yeah, fitting in Street Fighter is fitting into that. Well, this character has to be from some other country then with more than percent. Yeah, that has to be different, right? But if it's like a role-playing game, okay, maybe it has to fit in. Like, let's say it's like, you know, a fantasy game, right? So you start as a human, your girlfriend is an elf, you know, and then you pick up this like a dwarf bro, and then your 4th character is like some kind of monster, of course, you know, like a cat or something, and the 5th character is like a human half hybrid. The 6th playable character, you know, is like a half orc. You know, point. Then what should, you know, number 7 be? You know what I mean? Then you have to think about, well, maybe the 7th one should be like an evil character that has redeemed themselves. So there might be like, you know, a drow if it's Baldur's Gate. There might be something like that, right? Something that like fits into a little different character. Okay, someone that's like an evil race, something. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I think, right? And that's what I mean. Now, top down, right? Makes a lot more sense, because if you already have half or roughly so of the cast in your role-playing game, right, the next 3-4 heroes into your party, they should be different, right? More so from a personality, right? More so from how they fit into the party of the game, compared to other characters. Like for example, the bad guy that is in your party now, right? The bad guy that is either redeemed or maybe is straight up a bad guy still, but it's in your party temporarily because it's a very different, you know, like, you know, lore standpoint, right? Whatever, character standpoint. So you want to play that guy, right? Now, of course, when we've done that, we can now then design his mechanics, right, to fit into the party. And I also think it's very important, because this is something that's more important, right? The more characters you've already done, right? So again, if you're making a MOBA or something here, the more heroes you have in your MOBA, eventually it gets harder, of course, to, and I see myself too, of course it's harder eventually to add in like a new hero, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm working on the 11th hero here, or 20 hero, or whatever. It's getting harder, right? Because you're like, well, they have to be different, both from a mechanical standpoint, and also from like a personality and visual standpoint too, right? So it gets harder every time, definitely gets, but the more you do it, I think the more important it gets, right? That being said though, eventually you get to a point though, let's say, but now we go like 5 years here, right? Eventually you get to a point where it's like, well, I have to make something completely new, right? I want to shake up the meta, right? So then you go bottom up again, because now it's like, well, I don't care about the character at all. I just need to make these 5 mechanics. I want teleport, I want this thing. So of course you can still use bottom up, right? And like come up with, this should be the next hero, no matter what, right? Then someone else is filling in the blanks of who they are. That's not really important. I want the mechanics, all that matters, right? It might be like that. But usually it's much more like, you know, you first, like I said, the foundation is bottom up. You design half or whatever, right? The first heroes. Create the part, this is the character, this is the mechanics. She's the healer, he's the damage, he's the tank, so right? These are the mechanics they have. And then you start thinking more like, well, then I get the evil Magus guy, so he's gonna have these mechanics, right? But that is more important for the storyline, right? For the feeling of it. And even in like a fighting game where you clearly doesn't really matter in a sense because it's not party, right? In a sense, right? You don't have to like ally up, you're all enemies, whatever. I still think it really matters there too, because eventually, of course, in any kind of similar multiplayer game, you get to the same feeling where it's like, well, okay, I have all the mechanics, you know. There can be another video, but I can explain. You have the 8 different like, fighting game characters. I have all the the foundation of fighting game, okay. But now it's more like I still have like 10 playable characters. Okay? So now it's more like, well, I want the 11th character to feel different, you know. So it could be, for example, that the next character, F6, is Aki, this like poison lady, probably Fang's disciple, right? So now it's more like, well, I want an evil character, you know. Again, yeah, I want someone that's really evil, right? Or no, I want this like, you know, very attractive woman or whatever. No, I want this like old man, you know. That is starting to feeling more. I wanna sell the character, right, on the uniqueness, right? I mean, think about it as an evil and good way too, right? You don't wanna have you just like 10 chun-lis, right? You wanna have Chun-li and Kami, and then you have Juri, which is really evil, and then you have Aki, which is also evil, right? Because it's also boring if all the females are just good tushis, right? They're all nice ladies. And you want to have the crazy hot chick, right? It's also, you know, crazy evil, right? And the same thing with, of course, male or whatever. You want to have some trans character, you know. I mean, that's how you want to think, right? But so again, then top down, I feel as a designer, right, it's much more important after I kind of fill in, and not necessarily. It's not like I have to fill in the first playable. Just put out here. It is not necessarily that it's like the first 6 characters you design in the game, or the main party, say it's a role-playing game, right? And then the 7th character, or she's the evil woman that joins you later on. Necessarily, not at all, right, you know? I can still start by saying that, as I mentioned, my first approach is also bottom up, right? So I might still have designed you, so to speak, right? She might actually be my first character, right? And then I write her storyline. Oh, she can like teleport and do this thing, and she can like take over people's eyes, you know. So actually, the first hero or playable character that I design might be evil, right? You know, so it has to be that. So it's more like, but of course, if I have then designed a bunch of evil characters in a fighting game, for example, right? Then obviously, then top down tells me that, well, I need to like fit in and actually design some good people, you know what I mean? Now I need to character, yeah, the 7th character has to be a good woman, yeah, has to be a nice lady, right? So that's kind of way into it too. And this is not a video where I more will talk about how I think about like different characters, archetypes, and so on, right? Step 1 video get my work done. What I used was this kind of bottom-up approach, very mechanical, where I first actually wrote down all the mechanics I wanted, right, for like the game, so to speak. And then I sorted them out and said, okay, these mechanics, this is this pattern or whatever, right? Then I had the idea that every hero in the game, the first 9 heroes, was going to be one of the alignments, like, you know, chaotic evil and so on, right? So then I put kind of like, well, this woman is chaotic evil. These 20 mechanics will fit into that, right? So then I sorted out the mechanics per like alignment, and of course, in the actual final game, this woman doesn't have 20, you know, attacks or 20 mechanics, it's just like 5, right? But it's like one of these, you know, a mix of these 20 is gonna be the character, right? So they're kind of sorted like that. That's one way to work very systematically as a game designer. That might be the next video when I explain that more in detail. But I would say rather the way I look at that game and what I like with that game was that I was thinking more like, so that game has 3 different factions, like Stark or whatever, right? And what I did, even most importantly, is that I kind of used that orthogonal design differential and saying that, well, this faction, let's call it the Zerg, they can never use teleport. Okay? So the humans and Toss, they have teleport, you know? Okay, they can teleport. And then I was like, okay, but like damage over time, you know, poisons or whatever, that is only for the Zerg. That was kind of how I was thinking too. So I was also kind of sorting out all of these different mechanics a game can have, right? And I had some hard rules set very early in the production after we done a few casts, right? Okay, but every character on this side of the game, they can never use this thing, right? So there's also gonna be like a different thing here, like it's also be a different feel to them. For example, in that game, one of the factions, every faction can heal, right? But these healers on this faction, they can never heal directly. You know what I mean? They have to only heal with like heal over time. healing wells that to create some kind of healing turret, right? Maybe they can heal by a life steal, so heal themselves, or they can like transfer life, but they can never just heal someone. Because these are like weird evil guys, so they have to heal in this weird necromancer kind of healing way, or they have to heal in this weird way. Maybe they can sacrifice an ally to heal another ally, you know, they can like move health around and so on, but they can never use heal someone properly. These kind of rules to set that at like a macro level is a very good way to enforce orthogonal design, right? As I mentioned earlier, in RTS or whatever, if you have a bunch of different characters, like selling games, we have a bunch of different races and factions and so on, then it gets kind of more complicated, right? Because you have like 20, 30 playable units of one faction, and how do you make different? So I think those kind of overarching rules is the way to make that, right? Saying that, yes, but these 30 units, none of them can never have a direct heal. They can only have weird heals, right? That can be a good way. And then this other faction, here everyone only has, you know, like simplistic heals, but they can never learn these like weird, complicated heals, right? You know, that can be a way to think about it. That might be next video, guys. So what do you guys think? Please subscribe, press the like button, and have a great day.